Welcome to For the Record. I'm Kelly Sasso. Over the coming weeks, we will be focusing on the upcoming election. Each week, we'll hear from 3 candidates from a number of different races. They're sharing with us their top priorities and why they believe they are the right person for the job. Representing Western Pennsylvania in the nation's capital, we're hearing from the 2 Democrats running for Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district about why they deserve your vote.
I think this idea of understanding our values, being in touch, being present in the district is really critical for being a strong advocate for Western Pennsylvania.
And answering the questions about the biggest issues facing our country, domestically and overseas.
I've taken it very seriously, my responsibility to speak to people from every angle of this conflict, from our Jewish community to our Muslim and Palestinian and Arab communities.
Plus, taking her experience as a public defender in hopes of becoming our next Attorney General.
What makes me unique is that my vantage point allows me more context to help solve problems. It allows me to understand not only why the problems are occurring, but how they occurred. And I can use all of my legal expertise as well as my leadership skills to really solve those problems for people.
The Eastern PA Democrat on her vision to address a range of concerns, from violent crime and consumer protection to election integrity. One of the biggest races on the ballot in April is for Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district. It covers parts of Pittsburgh and many of the eastern Allegheny County communities, as well as a number of municipalities in western Westmoreland County. Democrat Summer Lee has held the seat since January of 2023, and she is being challenged by Edgewood Council member Bhavani Patel. We flipped a coin and determined that you'll hear from Patel first. She spoke with our Ryan Recker.
Let's start with your background, and how would you apply that background to potentially working in Washington?
Western PA has always been my home. My family's originally from India. My mom grew up in India, came to this country with lots of hopes and aspirations. When she came to the United States, we moved around quite a bit. She worked lots of different odd jobs, and then eventually we arrived in Monroeville, and she started a small catering business and then transitioned that into a food truck business. And so my family's been running food trucks for the last 25 years, and I grew up working in that small family business. And it taught me a lot about sort of just Western PA values, hard work, grit, aspiring for what the American dream means, and holding on to the promise of the American dream. I eventually went to the University of Pittsburgh and became the first in my family to graduate from college. Got my master's from the University of Oxford in international relations. I think this idea of understanding our values, being in touch, being present in the district is really critical for being a strong advocate for Western Pennsylvania. Being locally rooted, I think, is really critical. And ultimately, I think, we're living in a political climate right now where I think people are really tired of sort of divisiveness and extreme sort of rhetoric. And I think being able to bring a positive, wholesome approach to what collaboration could look like to deliver for Western Pennsylvania is really, really critical. And I think I'm ready and very excited to do that job.
As you see it, what is the most important issue facing the 12th congressional district, and what action would you like to see Congress take?
Really top of mind right now are reproductive justice, gun violence prevention, advocating for good paying union jobs, investing in vocational training programs. For me, as somebody who served in local government and lives in Edgewood, I surround a lot of communities that are dealing with a lot of challenges with housing. And so what can we do in terms of investing in bringing home federal dollars to invest in housing, to recreate the tax base, and how that directly has implications for our local school districts.
What do you think Congress should do to address issues like inflation?
As it relates to Western Pennsylvania, there are a couple of key things that really do come to top of mind based on my conversations. Just in the last few months, I think it was in October of 2023, there were 2 major federal opportunities that we actually missed out on, and I don't think that we should have missed out on those things. The Tech Hub designation was authorized by President Biden through the CHIPS and Sciences Act, and we have everything here in terms of Carnegie Mellon University, the University of Pittsburgh, Robotics Row, the innovation that's happening here as it relates to artificial intelligence. We here in Western Pennsylvania are leading on these things, not just here in PA12, but nationally and globally. The fact that we didn't get that designation and we missed out on the opportunity for $500 million that could have helped us catalyze conversations around renewable energy and addressing the climate crisis, but also simultaneously bringing people into the fold, bringing them into the economy, sustaining good paying union jobs. That's so critical, and that's a missed opportunity. And so when I think about my role serving in federal government, it's to make sure that I'm a partner to President Biden, to make sure that we're advocating for our fair share, that we're getting designations like that, because ultimately, in order to attract young talent, to make sure that they stay here, that they want to raise their families here, contribute to the economy by working here, building small businesses, we have to start winning things like that.
We are home to so many bridges in this area and other infrastructure projects that do require maintenance. What would you like to see Congress do to ensure the safety of those projects and the existing bridges?
And we truly have zero margin for error. I think it's absolutely critical that President Biden get reelected. I'm 100% for the infrastructure bill. I think it's important that we champion the work that he's done, because that has direct implications for working class families here. When the Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed, that had a direct negative impact on my family. My family runs food trucks. It takes about 15 minutes for them to get to the food trucks at Pitt and Carnegie Mellon. When the Fern Hollow Bridge collapsed, it was about 45 to 50 minutes to be able to travel. And that meant that they were missing out on morning customers. That was a $75 hit per day. And so when we think about infrastructure, it again has direct implications for working class families, and we need somebody who is willing to champion those issues.
So you touched on women's reproductive rights. What is your stance on abortion?
I think it's absolutely imperative that women have the right to choose. And again, I think that when we think about reproductive justice and advocating for women's rights, we really do have zero margin for error heading into the 2024 general election. And that means, being able to get President Biden reelected to protect our basic freedoms.
The war between Israel and Hamas is obviously a big issue for so many. What role do you think the United States should be playing in addressing the conflict?
Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district is also home to the worst anti-Semitic attack on American soil. And so for me, one of the key things has been being present in the community, being a shoulder to lean on and having conversations and trying to get a sense of where people's emotions are on this. And, there has been a rise in anti-Semitism. It has direct implications. There's a lot of fear, a lot of loneliness in our Jewish community. And so I think, the war is in Israel, but it has local impacts here. And I think it's really critical that we are sensitive to that. I think that the Biden administration has been doing everything that they can to ensure that there is humanitarian aid reaching Gaza, that there is minimization of loss of life, and that there is a path to be able to create opportunities for innocent Palestinians to leave and leave this war zone.
Finally, U.S. Steel has been in the news in the process of being sold to a Japanese company. From your view, what role does steel or manufacturing play as it pertains to Pittsburgh's economic engine?
We are a labor town. We have a rich history of labor. When we think about steel and manufacturing, it's absolutely critical that we think about the United States' role in this global picture. We have to reduce our dependency on foreign supply chains. We need to invest in our own supply chains. And that truly does mean investing in our own workers and building things here in this country.
You're watching For the Record. We're back right after this. Welcome back to For the Record, a focus on Commitment 2024. More now from the race for Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district. The incumbent, Congresswoman Summer Lee, spoke with our Shannon Perrine.
Let's talk a little bit about the Israel-Hamas war. What can Congress do to impact that?
We have the power of the purse. Where we send our dollars, what conditions we place on them, and even how we use our platforms and the influence, our diplomatic influence as, the global superpower is so important in this moment. Right now, we know that we send, $3.8 billion to Israel. And right now we have to be really clear that as we're sending those dollars, that they're not being used, in indiscriminate bombings that even President Biden has spoken out about, making sure that we are keeping folks to our red lines. Where do we, see issues, concerns with the ways in which Netanyahu has been conducting this war, but also humanitarian aid. Where and how does the United States prioritize its aid dollars that we send?
You have had some criticism from the Jewish community in Pittsburgh. What do you want to say to the Jewish community in the city of Pittsburgh?
We've had criticism from folks in and out of the Jewish community. And we've had praise and support and allyship from folks in and out of the Jewish community, because it is not a community that even shares the same ideas. We are trying to figure out, how do we have a very difficult, painful conversation in a way that doesn't make any of our community members feel as if we don't care for them, as if we don't hear them. So I've taken it very seriously, my responsibility to speak to people from every angle of this conflict, from our Jewish community to our Muslim and Palestinian and Arab communities, who people rarely ask about or rarely think about when we talk about who is impacted in Western Pennsylvania by this. We've talked to people who, of course, lost loved ones on October 7th. And I've talked to people who have lost loved ones every day since then. So I think that what we want to say is that we are having a conversation about, how do we create a just and lasting peace? And I believe, as do many, that the first step in that is a ceasefire.
I want to talk about abortion. Is the only way to shift the culture of what's going on in the United States back to where it was under Roe v. Wade, to have the House flip?
We also need a filibuster-proof majority, or we need to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate. We need to really tackle the culture that continues to send or radicalize the GOP, that they would target such an important piece of our health care, of women and birthing first health care. We need to address that head on. And yes, we need majorities, but when we have those majorities, we need to codify Roe. We need to make sure that never again do we have a Supreme Court that would target our rights that way. That means that we need to talk about comprehensive reform for the court.
When you talk about gun violence in the United States, is there I don't know, a slate of laws that you would like to change specifically tomorrow if you had a magic wand?
There are a slate of laws that we could implement right now that would start to make Americans safer. From particularly the brands of gun violence that has become pervasive throughout almost uniquely throughout American society. And that's mass shootings with, assault rifles. And that's, of course, banning assault rifles. That's strengthening background checks. We have a bill that would make sure that folks who have committed hate crimes could not access those type of weapons that they would then use, at the synagogue shooting here in Pittsburgh, or at Mother Emanuel in South Carolina. Red flag laws, making sure that if someone has lost or stolen a gun, that they have to report it. But also, there is a type of gun violence that isn't going to be fixed just by those. And poverty-based, community-based violence that we see in so many communities across America and here in Western Pennsylvania. And what that takes are policies that will address the root cause of such violence, which is poverty, which is access, which is ensuring that all children, irrespective of their zip code, have access to quality education, that they have access to good jobs in unions and opportunities, that they have transportation to those jobs in and out. That's a poverty issue that we have to be dedicated in solving.
What will you do? And maybe it's not manufacturing, maybe it's some other thing that can get people in really good life-sustaining jobs.
Yes. We can drive the conversation around green manufacturing, and we have with EOS, and helping them to secure, the $400 DOE loan, so that they can stay here in Western Pennsylvania, where they really feared that they were going to have to leave. That's 1,000 manufacturing jobs that come or stay in this region. Ads and Meds is, of course, a part of the equation. Robotics, science, space, those are critical pieces, and they don't have to be exclusive to just certain demographics in our region. So as a member of Science, Space, and Technology, I've worked all year to learn what does this industry mean for the future of our region, but also how do we close the representation gap within that field? How do we make sure that we're reaching young Black and brown students while they're in elementary school, even, to make sure that they have access to these jobs of the future, right? That means that we're making sure that they have access to technology courses, to advanced mathematics, to science courses, is making sure that they are exposed to these jobs. And we see, for instance, a company in Pittsburgh, privately owned, Astrobotic, that was this close, to getting us back to the moon. We're not going to stop. But Astrobotic, they have a part of their mission is being a part of the community, connecting with the students in Manchester and around the city, so that they get to experience, the joy of space and science right there in their own community. So those jobs are for us too. They can be for us too, and we have to prepare our workforce for them.
And we should note the loan Representative Lee mentioned was for $400 million to EOS, a Turtle Creek company that makes batteries as a green energy solution. You're watching For the Record. We're back right after this. Welcome back to For the Record, a focus on Commitment 2024. Right now, we're going to take a look at the candidates on the ballot for Pennsylvania Attorney General. We are inviting all 7 candidates from both sides of the aisle to speak with us ahead of the primary. Today, we're getting to know Keir Bradford Gray, a public defender from Montgomery County. What do you think is one of the greatest legal challenges for Pennsylvania right now, and how would you go about addressing that if you were to be the winner of this?
Well, one of the legal challenges are going to be the challenges to our democracy. I mean, we have to make sure that we create an opportunity for people to have faith and credibility in our democracy. So I'll be making sure that everyone has correct information and that any challenges that are coming from any other party will be stood up and held up, because we have very clear boundaries and guidelines about how we're running our election cycles.
And that was something that did come up during Shapiro's administration.
Absolutely.
And his time in that position. So are those the kind of challenges that you're speaking about?
We are, because we're going to see this continue to keep coming as people have still not accepted the results of the 2020 election. And this is unfortunate, but it is where we are, and we're just going to need to be vigilant in making sure that we're understanding what our processes are, understanding what our protections are, and making sure that attorneys generals and district attorneys and whoever election judges have what they need to just listen to the cases individually and make the right decisions.
Tell us a little bit about your background and what makes you the best candidate for this.
I was a public defender in both federal and state offices, and then I was an administrator of the public defender offices in both Montgomery County and Philadelphia County, which is the largest. And what makes me unique is that my vantage point allows me more context to help solve problems. It allows me to understand not only why the problems are occurring, but how they occurred. And I can use all of my legal expertise as well as my leadership skills to really solve those problems for people, because people are feeling so many challenges, not just in their neighborhoods and communities, but in their households. And a lot of those are very invisible to many people, but I saw those issues as I was working for people that came into the justice system, whether they were children or adults. And I want to be able to use all of that expertise to make sure that I target the right approaches to bring more opportunity to people and to improve their life outcomes.
Gun violence is something we unfortunately hear about a lot. What about that topic would you do differently right now if you were in that position?
Well, gun violence is something that's an epidemic for a reason. And when you call something an epidemic, that means it's out of control. So I would look to really control access to weapons, because I've seen that become more ubiquitous over the years. First of all, we need to really defend common sense gun laws. So anyone who is retailing and supplying guns needs to make sure that we check whether or not they're following background checks or they're following transferring the sales. If they're not doing those things, they need to be held accountable, because they are part of the problem. But we also need to close the loop on ghost guns. We have allowed for companies to manufacture parts and ship them all throughout our Commonwealth to create guns that are untraceable. When I was a public defender, I saw untraceable guns, and they would really scratch off the serial number so that it couldn't be traced back to the person who legally bought them. But now we just made it easier for people to do and use these guns illegally, and we're not able to close that loop. We're going to have to be more vigilant with what that looks like and why that is able to be open. The door should not be open for a gun that its only purpose is to use it for an illegal means. There's no other reason why you would have an untraceable gun. And I think the greatest portion of the Attorney General's office is that it can be more proactive and preventive, and it works with businesses. So manufacturers, there are attorneys generals now urging manufacturers to do more to improve the quality of their product so that police can do things like actually solve crimes when the damage is done with those products. There's micro-stamping technology that allows for the bullets to be traced to the actual gun it came from, so that if there is a crime scene and the only thing left are the remnants, the officers can do a much better job at solving problems, solving crimes more efficiently and effectively.
What would your priorities be if you were to get this position when it comes to consumer protection?
Well, there's a few priorities that I would have, but mostly this is the greatest portion of this office because it actually can level set the playing field for people. There's so many people that don't know who to call when they're getting either preyed upon or defrauded, or they're being discriminated against because they can't get access to resources. I would look at advancing equity through those protections from the civil rights area as well as the consumer protections in a few main areas. Looking at life affordability, right? There's an anti-price gouging bill that was just passed through our Senate. Bob Casey actually passed that bill. That gives states' attorney generals a broader opportunity to go in and make sure that people aren't being charged more for less, or their everyday basic needs are not being price gouged up out the market. Insurance coverage. I know this is one of the areas, healthcare is one of the areas that I want to really pay attention to. We've got to be able to advance equity in healthcare practices. Insurance coverage, making sure people are getting access to what they need so they can live healthy and productive lives. And then the other area is housing. Housing is becoming really out of control, and we've got to reel this back in. There are working class people that cannot afford to rent property for their children and just to have basic stabilities. If we want children to be healthy children and go to schools that are going to be educating them, we're going to have to make sure that they have a stable place to live. And there are a lot of people coming in, buying up houses, pricing people out of the market, and we are not being able to regulate that. And this is something that I want to really take a look at as the Attorney General.
You're watching For the Record. We're back right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. If you have a topic that you would like us to address, send us an email to news@WTAE.com. You can also rewatch this episode or any episode with the Very Local app on your smartphone, tablet, or smart TV. Thanks so much for joining us this morning and have a great week.